Okay, so just want to say good afternoon to everyone. My name is John Rakowski, Director of Product Marketing here at AppDynamics. So for this next session, this is all about best practices to APM, to AppDynamics adoption. And we're going to have a little bit of fun in regards to the way we look at APM adoption. So Stefano is going to be looking at how APM kind of corresponds to actually cooking, which is one of his favorite pastimes. In fact, if he wasn't here today, if he wasn't working at AppDynamics, he would probably have a famous restaurant somewhere in Italy, probably. So there'll be time for questions at the end. I hope that the content will prompt lots of questions. And with that, I'm going to hand over to Stefano.
Thanks, John. So let's see if... Oh, interesting. That's the Marfilo. Okay. So I'm Stefano Mazzone, like John said. I'm a solution architect at AppDynamics. I've been working here for about 3 years and a half, actually 4 years in January. I usually help customers driving adoption, helping them to get the most out of AppDynamics, making sure that they basically get value out of their investment. I've been working in the IT industry for about, well, since 1998. I started as a developer, and I've been playing with COBOL, assembly, basic, Visual Basic, C#, and then I moved to Java, on which I feel some relief, I would say. And then I started my interest into APM back in 2004, and since then I've been working into application performance management. When I'm not at the customer side, I love traveling, hiking, photography, and as John said, cooking is actually one of my passions. I'm Italian, you know, so we love good food. Okay, so here it is our agenda for today. We'll have a small introduction. I'm going to use an analogy throughout our presentation. And then we'll basically show you how we currently approach APM project at AppDynamics. So possibly I'm going to share tips and tricks throughout the session, and then we'll leave space for a question at the end. So, and it is from the art of cooking where the analogy comes from, because it's like for cooking, when you actually have a set of ingredients that actually doesn't change throughout recipes, it's very similar to APM projects. So there is a set of predefined ingredients that usually don't change. And as for cooking, you know, ingredients are not only the things that you should actually care, but it's actually how you execute that makes the difference. And I don't know if sometimes it happened to you. I'm just... Yeah, I think the previous presenter told me that he had some issue with this, but okay, no worries. I'll keep on pushing. Let's see. So as for cooking, sometimes the result is you know, something different on what you see, especially if you look at you know, blogs and cookbook books. You may notice that, you know, every recipes look delicious, but then when it comes to actually realize, the result is far from delicious, right? I don't know if it happens to you as well. So how many of you have already AppDynamics installed? Okay, great. Okay. Any other APM solution for the rest already using? So do you guys have any other APM solution already? Not really. Okay, great. So let's see what a great deployment actually looks like. So this is based on my experience on the field, but also some of the analysts, IT analysts, actually mention what are the top APM project fail reason. But essentially, what I would like to emphasize is 4 of the most important things that actually makes the difference while you actually go through a journey of an APM project. And the first one is actually ownership. An APM project should have a clear and defined ownership. And this is actually directly tied to the second pillar, which is actually APM project is actually a cross-department effort. It actually involves and requires collaboration from many different teams, sometimes with different objectives, sometimes also spread on different geographic location. So it's really important to actually get collaboration among different teams and actually make a huge difference in terms of successful or not successful project. And also, a great APM deployment should actually focus on business metrics. And I think you've heard several times during the conference actually mentioning business insight, business impact throughout the conference. So we believe that getting IT metrics is important, but not as much as important as correlating with business metrics. Because at the end of the day, the business doesn't care if a query is low. They really want to understand if how many users were impacted, which users were impacted. And also, another important pillar is an APM deployment should be fast to be deployed and should actually demonstrate immediate value. And that's really important. You will see, especially during the deploy phase, one of the phases I'm going to introduce, we really want to demonstrate immediate value. So let me actually show you what is the typical approach we follow at AppDynamics. So no secret sauce, just a set of steps that we actually perform throughout our journey. And the first one is actually what we call the plan and design phase. So it's during this phase where we actually focus on basically, as the name implies, planning and do technical design. And I'm going to deep dive into each individual phase. So the second phase is what we call the deploy phase, where we actually concentrate on deploying AppDynamics component. And we want to actually show immediate value. We want to actually demonstrate business value, because this is important for a successful implementation. And then we have what we call the embed phase, where we actually continue our deployment, and also we start configuring an AppDynamics component as well. We want to make sure that we basically demonstrate even greater value here. And then the last phase, which we call expand and enhance phase, where we want to basically ensure that AppDynamics is actually optimized and is actually fitting into existing processes. We want to make sure that AppDynamics is actually used on a regular basis. So those are the 4 phases that we currently use while delivering APM projects. And I'm going to deep dive into each individual phase. So the first phase, the way I envision, the way I like to picture this is like you go to the market and you actually, you wake up early, you want to actually buy quality ingredients because you know that this will make the difference. But as I said, it's also important to actually the way you execute. So we are going to see for each individual phase what are the key quality ingredients and what are the important steps during the cookbook. It's actually during the plan and design phase where we basically arrange what we call design workshop. So those are a set of sessions where we actually want to engage with different stakeholders. We don't do that at the same time, so we don't actually gather all the stakeholders at the same time, but we actually try to break down the session into multiple sessions where we actually engage with different stakeholders, and we invite them only on pertinent session. So the purpose of this session is really to gather use cases, understanding monitoring needs, understand specifically the current state. So sometimes customers has already an APM solution, and they just want to understand how to transition to a new one. Or sometimes, but it's, I would say, rare, they start from scratch. But the idea is to really take a picture and basically understand what is the current state. If they have an existing product, if they have, obviously, if they've been using existing product into existing processes, and how people actually use existing products. And we want to actually engage with different stakeholders just to understand the different perspective. And also we want to understand what are the resources to be involved throughout the project. I'm going to expand more on this, but one of the outcomes of the plan and design phase is what we call the high-level design document, which is where we want to basically collect all the information we gather during the design workshop. For the cookbook part, what we want to do is also we want to identify project objectives. And we want to also set expectation. And the two main stakeholders we engage with during this phase is definitely the solution owner and the executive sponsor. We want to make sure to set expectation and to basically understand the objective and validate business needs, especially with the solution owner and the executive sponsor at the beginning, throughout the project, and especially at the end of the project, just to make sure that we align with their business needs. And then, of course, we want to put in place a project plan where we have activities described, tasks, roles, especially milestones, and responsibilities. I won't spend additional word on the plan part, because this is really, we are stepping into project management. What I would like to focus more is one of the deliverables during the design phase, which is what we call the high-level design document. And the high-level design document is, again, is not a static document. It's something which is a living document. And you will see during the deploy phase, we actually go and update that document as well. So it's definitely a living document. So the aim of the design workshops is basically to understand how we are going to use AppDynamics, how AppDynamics is going to actually help the customer realizing the use cases. And basically, what is the environment? What are the existing processes we are going to actually fit AppDynamics into? We basically want to gather use cases. And in the high-level design document, we want to also describe what is the target state of the architecture. So we are going to understand what are the modules to be used, if it's only APM core, end-user monitoring, analytics, infrastructure visibility, DB monitoring. And then we want to understand what is the deployment scope. So we want to understand the deployment model, especially if it's on-premise. We are going to understand what are also the sizing requirements, because we want to start procuring the servers for deploying the application performance management infrastructure. If it's on SaaS, it's going to be easier for you because our SaaS operation team is actually managing on your behalf the infrastructure. And then we want to also understand and define what are the naming convention and the application model. You may have heard several times, maybe during other session, discussing about application tiers and names. And those are really important concepts in AppDynamics. And we will see, we'll actually deep dive into those later on. So that's why it's important during the design phase to understand and talk and define about naming convention. And we want to also gather requirements in terms of dashboards, KPIs, and also we want to understand how we are going to integrate AppDynamics as well into existing tools, into existing systems. So at the end of the day, we want to validate the document. We want to get acceptance of the document with the different stakeholders. We typically invite the monitoring team, application infrastructure architect, and also definitely the solution owner, business owners, because we want to actually gather requirements from them. And then with this, I will basically move to the second phase, which is basically the deploy phase. And I like to picture this as a good appetizer. So you want to have a good start. You want to have a quick start, but essentially we want to show value during the deploy phase. And the quality ingredients during the deploy phase are essentially you start deploying the application, the AppIQ, what we call the AppIQ, so your controller, if it's on premise. If it's on SaaS, it's going to be easier, again, because it's actually already spin up for you and managed by our operation teams. But basically, you start deploying agent, machine agent, browser, real user monitoring agent. And then the idea is to actually deploy on at least a couple of environments. So we start with a pre-production UAT environment, and we actually move to production our configuration. But the most important item on this slide during the deploy phase, basically, is what we call quick wins. We really want to show immediate value. The way to do that is actually try to basically build relation with the marketing team, right? We want to basically use AppDynamics to show how we can help solving problem. And a quick hint here is you can use application mobile crash report just to show how your end user are actually impacted by performance problem, just to understand their user experience. Or another good example could be to basically use AppDynamics to monitor the application and understand what is the impact on the business during peak time. Or another example is to use MapIQ, so basically our flow map, just to understand what are the dependencies into your application infrastructure. So the last example could be to use AppDynamics to monitor CPU memory consumption and understand how the applications scale. So those are all examples of quick wins that let you market the project, get visibility, and get acceptance also from the solution owner, and especially from the executive sponsor. As for Cookbook, we want to basically apply the naming convention that we defined during the design phase. And then we start modeling the application infrastructure in terms of application tiers and nodes. And I'm going to span more on this. But the most important thing that I want to highlight, and I'm sure you have heard several times during other sessions, is that we want to actually use an automated mechanism to basically deploy the agent. And this is really crucial when it comes to deploy hundreds or thousands of agents. So if the customer has already something that he uses in place, great. We can use existing mechanism. Otherwise, we actually have Chef Cookbook that we are available. I have actually a link in the appendix that you can use to actually download that. And the life is going to get even more easier when we will have our universal agent. Because at that point, you can actually centralize the configuration, the installation, and the upgrade of agents. But the last item is also important. I mentioned that the high-level design document is not a static document. It's actually a living document. So if you understand that your naming convention or the model actually changed, my strong suggestion here is to actually update the design. We want to make sure that we reflect the architecture and the design in the document. With this, I will basically give you some tips and tricks about the way you typically model the application. So in AppDynamics, you can actually either model into a single monolithic business application or into multiple applications. My suggestion is to start with a single application and then use or split into multiple applications only when there is a particular needs. And I'm going to expand more on this, but the idea is that you may want to actually split into multiple applications when, for example, you have a set of shared common service which are heavily reused among the application infrastructure. And you may want to have a granular set of permission actually to different applications. But I would definitely start with a single application and then move to multiple applications if there is a particular need again. As for naming convention, it's really crucial the way you actually name nodes, because nodes are essentially what infrastructure guys, your first level support, your NOC operation team are going to basically use when they actually receive an alert or when they have to actually investigate to a problem. So that means that having a great naming convention, having meaningful name will definitely help improve the mean time to repair. And the same applies for tier names. Tier names are definitely the way you actually use to group multiple nodes of the same kind. So the way you actually logically map your service into your application infrastructure. And tier are essentially important for people who are supposed to actually be responsible for those services. So that's why it's really also important to have meaningful name for them. This is actually an example, and it's based on a real example I've seen on the field. When I mentioned that it's important to actually start modeling into a single application, here one of our customers actually started modeling a single application infrastructure into 3 separate applications. And we can see we had on the left side, we have multiple tiers, each of them containing one node. And 2 of the tiers actually communicate with 2 backend systems. So in that particular case, I would suggest actually to model those 2 applications as a tier, because it doesn't really make any difference to model this tier as tier, actually. So instead of using application, to use a tier to model that application and actually define as a single AppDynamics application the overall things. Again, my suggestion is start with single and then split into multiple AppDynamics application if you understand that you have a shared service that are actually complex and composed by multiple tiers and multiple nodes. Otherwise, just stick with a single AppDynamics application. Another good reason to actually move to multiple application is if you want to have a better granularity in terms of permission, because the permission right now are you can actually assign them at the application level. So that means that if you want to actually assign permission at the tier level, you need to split into multiple AppDynamics applications. And then with this, I will basically move to the next phase, which is actually what we call the embed phase. And the way I picture this is like, a good main dish, a good pasta, for example. So we want to make sure that remote control works. Yeah, we want to make sure that we start configuring our AppDynamics component. And how many of you think that we should start with business transaction? Few of you. Okay. How many of you thinks that we should start with flow map? Okay. We should start with flow map, and the reason for this is because we want to make sure that, when it comes to configure business transaction, our flow map are actually consistent, and we do reflect what is the actual application infrastructure. I will expand more on this, but essentially flow map will help also validate your application infrastructure and see if during the deployment phase we actually forgot or we simply didn't realize that there was some additional component that we needed an agent to be deployed. So essentially with the flow map we can understand if the set of entry points, which are going to be the business transaction or the end user monitoring pages, are consistent, or we need to actually basically go and deploy additional agent, or we need to actually understand if there is any missing correlation, anything that we don't detect out of the box. And you may have seen that we now have education classes on custom correlation as well, because one of the reasons where on the flow map you don't see all the tiers connected is actually because there may be a missing correlation. So that's why it's important to actually start by validating flow map. And we do have flow map at different level. How many of you know which kind of flow map do we have? Can you mention some of the flow map that we do have? Application one, then business transaction, and then there is another one. Tier, that's the correct one. So we do validate the application flow map before we start actually configuring our business transaction, because we want to have to make sure that we have the full end-to-end visibility, right? And then we start configuring business transaction, and then we validate transaction and tier flow map, just to make sure that we have also end-to-end visibility. And then we move to configuring business transaction and real user monitoring pages. You may have heard this several times, I'm pretty sure. I see one of my colleagues in the room as well. He may have mentioned that we should focus on what is really critical for the business first. So we should focus on what is most critical in terms of transaction and then user monitoring pages. So my suggestion is go and start with the 10, 20 top critical transaction. And the rule of thumb here is really to ask yourself if a transaction is important to be monitored. And after, go to the business owner, to the application owner, and ask if this is a customer-facing transaction. And if it is, it's relevant and it's critical for the business, this is definitely something that you want to monitor. If it's something which is not customer-facing, it may be modeled as a service endpoint. How many of you know about service endpoint? Okay, good. So in this case, my suggestion is, if it's not customer-facing, but it's still something you want to monitor, because one of your team is actually interested in monitoring that, you can use service endpoint. And you leave room for a business transaction, because business transaction, if you have a good set of business transaction and real user monitoring pages, these are our first-class metric. You may have heard Bhaskar. Bhaskar said business transactions are the center of our universe. And this is true because we do use those as first-class metric when it comes to build dashboard, when it comes to build alerts. So that's why they are so important. And then the same applies for backend. We also use backend to actually build dashboard alerting. And we do validate backend in flow maps. Let me actually tell you how you can validate flow map. Well, of course, you can use flow map itself. If you have developer handy, you can actually start validating flow map with them, just to understand if you have any missing entry point or any missing link between two different tiers. but also you can use call graph. So a good indicator of missing correlation in a call graph is, for example, that works in both Java and .NET. If you have a presence of object.wait, that's a good indicator that will tell you that there is something that we couldn't tag and follow all the way through. And also, another good indicator is if your application is heavily relying on messaging. So my rule of thumb is to understand how the application actually consumes, how the application publishes messages in queue or topics, just to understand if in the flow map I have the full picture. And I'm going to show you an example in the next slide of a flow map and how I did validate that flow map to understand that something was missing. When it comes to business transaction, again, I won't stress enough, but my suggestion is really to focus on what is most important, most critical for the business. You can start using custom match rule to actually define what is important in terms of business transaction and user monitoring pages. And then you can use what we call a catch-all rule, where you can actually group or exclude everything else under a special bucket. And I'll show you an example of how you can do that. I'm pretty sure one of my colleagues actually demonstrated this today as well. So at the end of the day, once you complete your configuration in terms of transaction, in terms of end-user monitoring pages, what you want to make sure is to export that configuration. And you can do that from, how many of you know how you can export your configuration from AppDynamics? Okay. For the rest of you, the way you can do that is either from the UI, you can actually export your application configuration, or you can use REST API, which is actually make your life easier because you can actually also semi-automate the process. But my suggestion here is once you have the configuration exported, you can actually also go into your internal wiki, I'm sure you have a wiki, and document and link that configuration on your versioning system. So in that way, you can start also making notes and documenting your changes as well, so that if after 3 months, one of your colleagues or you actually go back to the configuration, you know what you did, and you know that the changes were made. And also on the versioning system, this will help you because you can actually add comment. So this is really a simple best practice that I usually keep on suggesting, and I'm sure some of you may have heard me telling this several times. So with this, I will show you an example of a flow map and how I did validate that flow map. So if you look at the picture, there is a particular tier, which is the movie processing role here, which is basically consuming messages from a queue. But if you pay attention, there is something missing here. We don't see any other component actually publishing messages on that queue. And this is something which happens to me actually on the field. So I noticed this, and the problem was the customer didn't deploy on a specific tier an AppDynamics agent. And once we deployed the agent, we could see basically the new tier appearing here. And the reason for that was that this agent was actually sending information, and he was actually getting messages from that queue. But on the controller side, there was something missing. No agent actually reporting that piece of the application infrastructure, right? So that's why it's important to start validating flow map before you actually start validating or you start configuring a business transaction. As for naming, I mentioned naming convention is relevant. For transaction and user monitoring pages, we should use a naming convention that is actually understood by everyone who is expected to basically access AppDynamics. No matter if it's IT or business. And this is important because in that way you can use a common language. So in that particular example here, by default, if you use AppDynamics and you start auto detection, but even if you actually start configuring your transaction, most of the customer I notice use the first two segments. But in that particular scenario, the second segment is actually containing a dynamic part, which is basically a purchase order, which will change over time. So if you use the two segments, we will end up having an explosion in terms of business transaction. We want to make sure to basically apply either a regular expression here to make sure that we actually match this as a single transaction type. Because otherwise, it's meaningless, right? It doesn't, so it's better to actually name this transaction as ticket process order, basically. Because this doesn't tell us anything, right? Another example is on the end-user monitoring part. What I notice sometimes that, we use what we actually detect as a segment. And in that particular case, that name may be, can you guess which type of transaction is actually referring to? Who can guess which type of transaction is referring to? It's actually a login transaction. But it's not immediately clear that this is a login transaction. And as Jyoti said, maybe most of us are technical guys. So you can imagine a business guy actually can understand if this is actually login page. So that's why naming is so important. We should actually use a common language. With this, I will show you an example of how you can configure a catch-all rule, which is basically helping you having a consistent set of transaction or end-user monitoring pages. So you basically use priority. You basically configure a rule which is having a lower priority that is going to be applied last, so that any other custom match rule is going to be applied first. And you can do the same, for example, on the end-user monitoring part, where you have a catch-all which is matching a particular regular expression with a different priority. So these are really simple tips that I wanted to share with you. I will move to the next phase, which is actually the way I like to picture this phase is like a good dessert, because we are approaching, the end of the phase, and we want to make sure that we actually continue demonstrating value. We want to make sure that we actually show how AppDynamics can actually improve performance, and also we want to make sure that we supplement our APM solution with business metrics. But why business metrics are so relevant, so important to us? I think you may have heard several reasons. My understanding is that with Business IQ, which is essentially analytics, not only you can basically understand if there was a problem, and the problem was actually impacting your revenue, but at the same time you can actually understand which kind of user were impacted, which kind of device they were using, from which location they were accessing the application. And at the end of the day, you can actually use that information to go to your marketing team and actually make sure that they can reach out customer just trying to mitigate the problem. And if APM will help you and basically understand and improve your mean time to repair, Business IQ will definitely help you understand and improve what we call the mean time to business awareness. Because, as I said at the initial of the workshop, you may want to make sure that the business has the right set of metric, and they don't care about SQL query, which are slow. They don't care about call to external system, which are slow. They do care about user complaining. They want to understand why the user are complaining. which kind of user are complaining, from which region. If it's actually the problem affecting all the population of the user or only a specific set. And then once you have business IQ and also IT metrics collected, we do actually baseline metrics as we do with IT metrics. And at that point, you can understand what is normal, what is expected, what deviates from the normal. And we can actually define health rule to basically understand not only if we have a problem, a performance problem, but how the business is actually impacted. And with health rule, my suggested approach is kind of staged approach, where you actually start defining health rule, and you actually integrate only with maybe a Slack instant message or a small distribution list. You don't want to surface alerts immediately, because what we want to do is we want to test the quality of our alert. And my rule of thumb here is basically we want to make sure that we use a small distribution list where we can actually go and check if we have false positive and try to avoid as much as we could. Because there is no worse thing that we can do to actually surface alerts to our first level support and not team, and then nobody will pay attention. So again, the rule of thumb is actually once you go to the test phase, to make sure that either you have an existing playbook or you make sure to create a playbook where you describe for each, ideally, individual alert, a set of action, who the first level support or the NAC operation team, they are going to engage when they receive an alert, and they should know how they should actually act after they receive an alert. So an alert should have an actionable set of consequences. And that's also a rule of thumb to understand when you should surface an alert. And once you have health rule in place, you can actually go and use the policies as well to basically, at that point, the imagination is the only limit you have, because you can go and automate also remediation action. You can actually automate, you can scale up, you can scale down your application as well. You can restart and mitigate the problem in a semi-automatic or automatic way. With that, I will move to the last part of the journey, which is actually really important, because it's during the expand and enhance phase where we want to actually make sure that we integrate AppDynamics into existing process, into existing systems. And we want to make sure that we actually build a set of dashboards which are useful for many different stakeholders, which may have different roles and different perspectives. But at the same time, what we want to make sure is that we want to basically understand if there is an existing process, for example, to onboard a new application. So everyone in the company should be able to understand, especially business owner, how to onboard a new application in AppDynamics. So if you don't have a project, my suggestion, if you don't have a process already, my suggestion is to create a process and to make clear, maybe on the internal wiki, how to request access to onboard a new application. Or same, how to request access to AppDynamics. So at that point, we integrate with many different systems, Active Directory, LDAP, but we can also integrate with your existing business intelligence tool. We have plenty of extension on our community. So my pray for you is really look at the community, because if you want to integrate with Slack, for example, we do have an extension already. So you don't have to reinvent the wheel. Someone else did the job for you. And also, we want to enable people. So we want to instill knowledge. We want to make sure that everyone who's supposed to have access to AppDynamics and consume metrics will have a clear training path. So my suggestion is to create on a wiki different training paths for different purposes. So you may have, at the end of the day, different level of user into AppDynamics. You may have people who are going to actually consume the metrics on a regular basis, that maybe they need to know how to consume metric, how to access dashboard, how to navigate dashboard, how to actually navigate and make sense of data. But then you may have your subject matter expert that needs to know how to basically use automatic leak detection, or how to maintain the solution, how to make backup, things like this. So that's why, creating different training paths by using also our AppDynamics accelerator, or our education team is, more than welcome to help you with this, is a good way. But the cherry on the pie on enabling people is by using what we call lunch and learn, or brown bag session. So you can use, let's say, lunchtime, where you actually set some session on specific topic. For example, you can actually use AppDynamics to show on production how to diagnose and triage and troubleshoot a problem on your production system. Or you can actually show how to make sense of data, how to build dashboard, how to basically, make sense of data while there is a problem, how to look at a previous incident on production and do post-mortem analysis. So this will help you also evangelize and, market your project as well and get visibility, especially with the solution owner and the executive sponsor, right? And, the last things I would like to suggest here is really, you can take 10 minutes of your time and maybe start creating a slide deck where you actually document a problem you fix with AppDynamics, the resolution, how AppDynamics helped to fix the problem, and the business impact. And you go and spread the word. You actually evangelize the use of AppDynamics in that way. So you may feel really full at the end of the journey. I would like to actually wrap up with some recommendation, and maybe we'll offer you either a coffee or a good cappuccino with a nice view on Venice. My top recommendation for you, as you may have heard, is really to focus on what is relevant for the business. Use business metric as much as you could together with IT metrics. Focus on what is critical in terms of business transaction, in terms of real user monitoring pages. Just try to either group or exclude the rest, just to be sure that you can improve your mean time to repair in a best way. Document your quick wins. This will help you definitely spread the word, evangelize, but at the same time also get visibility. And also, I will end up by saying that this is an iterative process, and obviously we all learn from mistake. So at the end of each iteration, my suggestion is to document also the mistake and try to learn from mistake and just try to improve. With this, I just want to open up for question, and I'm sure you have plenty of questions.
Yeah, we just got time for maybe kind of one or two questions.
And by the way, we like to have your feedback here.
Hi, you talked about maybe using service endpoints instead of business transactions for services that potentially are not customer facing. In the world of microservices and APIs, where you're going to have kind of a web of services, is that the route you would suggest? Because they're not going to be specifically customer facing in most cases.
Yeah.
But they're still going to want to have some business transaction view.
Yeah, in some of them I would suggest to use business transaction, but not for all of them, definitely. But I would say at the end of the day, if it's not customer facing, really service endpoint were actually designed to actually address those kind of application infrastructure, especially for service-oriented architecture. This is definitely one of the key items that you want to use to configure and model your application infrastructure. Absolutely.
The only caveat for that is that you have to make sure that there is a leverage between the number of service endpoints and the number of business transactions. Remember that a service endpoint belongs to the context of a business transaction. If you have, for example, 50 business transactions, but you have 5,000 service endpoints, at the very end, you're going to be having 100 service endpoints, but one business transaction. you have a limit of 20 snapshots per minute per BT, which means that 100 service endpoints will be competing for one of those precious 20 snapshots per minute, and will be making non-effective your troubleshooting capabilities if you're just focusing on service endpoints. So his approach is absolutely right. You have to leverage the number of service endpoints versus the number of business transactions that are tied to those service endpoints. Done.
Thanks, Jose. Jose is also working in EMEA.
Okay, thank you very much. I know we're kind of running up against the time. So before I say thank you, I just want to say that our next session is going to be day 2 keynote, which is back over in the Chelsea Theatre. You're going to see some exciting kind of new innovations from the AppDynamics labs. But from that, I'd like to say thank you to Stefano. It was a really interesting talk, and give him a round of applause.
Thanks for having me on the stage. Thank you so much.